Hi, this is Brian with Profitless Media and Post, and today we're going to take a look at the Lidar capabilities of mobile devices and whether or not they're good enough for visual effects. Now, in the past, I've played with this and my results have been mixed, but the other day I was out on a hike and decided to do another test, and I was actually pleasantly surprised with the results that I got. So this is by no means a replacement for a professional laser scanner, which is going to be by far more accurate. But for some baseline visual effects, I think this could work pretty well. My main focus on the test was whether or not I could scan an object or an area and then use it to help with solving a 3D camera so that our scan mesh perfectly lines up within our scene so that we could use the 3D mesh within either our 3D software or our compositing. So that was the real main focus. So you can see here, I did this scan. I used Polycam for this scan, although I think you could use probably any other scanner. Some of the other apps that I've used are Scaniverse and Metascan, which just recently changed their name to Abound. But both of those are pretty good scanners. You can just check out whichever one you think is best. So all I did was, I haven't really done anything to the mesh. All I did was import it into Blender. And all I did in here was just kind of level out our scan, scale it up, and then move the pivot point to the center. So if I select the object, you can see now my pivot point is right on the origin, and then I have my geometry lined up. And that's all I've done in here. And once I was done with that, I went over to File and then Export OBJ. And the only other thing I did, and we're not going to really use the texture for compositing, but for setting up our 3D tracking, it can be really helpful. So we can either export out the texture yourself, or if you just find the location of the texture from your 3D scan, you can add it in, and I'll show you how that all works in a sec. So with those two things exported, I just headed into Syntheyes. So let's head over there. So in Syntheyes, the other thing that I did when I was out on the hike was I took this video kind of going towards the wall to use as test footage to see if everything will line up. So what we want to do in Syntheyes is we want to bring in our mesh, and we're going to use that mesh to help with our solve. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to File, Import Mesh. We're going to locate our Polycam OBJ. That's how I exported it, opened it up. Do you want to strip the normals? I'll say no. And you can see as it comes in, it's huge. Okay, so if we go to the quad view, you can see how large this is. So one of the things we could do just so we can do the tracking is the camera itself. We go to 3D, go over to camera, because I don't want to scale the mesh. I want it to be this size. So we don't want to touch it at all. One of the things we could do is make sure we're on our first frame and just take the Z location and let's just make that 1000. And just by doing that, all we did was move the camera way back here just so we can visually see the object. Now let's change our layout to camera in perspective. This is how we're going to set up our scene. So hit lock, and that locks in the camera. And over here you can see that our mesh is actually getting cut off because the world size isn't big enough. So we can fix that by going over to the solver, and over here where it says world size, let's just change that to 1000. And now we can see the full mesh. The next thing we're going to want to do is we want the mesh over here to have the original texture. And we can fix that by going over to 3D, just select the mesh and come down here to texture panel. Let's click on that, set file. This is our texture file straight from Polycam. And we're just going to open that up, and then we can close this. That's going to add the texture to our mesh, and we can't see it right now. So let's over in the perspective view, let's go to mesh, and down at the bottom we have solid mesh. Click on that and then just click off of the mesh, and now we can see our 3D model in here. I'm going to turn off the lock, and now you can see we have our 3D model in here with all the textures. Now this is going to be nice because over here on this camera, let's just turn off that mesh. So we have our footage here and we have our 3D model here. And what we're going to do is we're going to find locations on our 3D model that are also very easily tracked over here in our footage. And then we're going to link them. Once we link those points, they're going to set seed values, and we're going to use that seed value, which is a locked point, to help with getting an initial solve. And so we'll see how all this works. So now we can look around on our 3D model and make sure that we can find points that are easily recognizable. Now, as we look at the mesh, you can see like in here, there's not really any information. So obviously we don't want to track here. You could do the auto track and then try to guess where things are going to be, but I would spend the time to do at least 4, probably 5 or 6 actual manual tracks just to try to get this lined up the way you want it. Okay, so let's take a look at this. One of the things I see right away is, we have these little spots right here. Those should be pretty easy to track. This one here. So why don't we go over to the tracker and let's add a tracker on here, the black dot, and just lock that up. I'm also going to do one right here. And let's see if there's any other ones that we can do. Maybe that one right there. Can we see that? We might be able to do that one. Maybe this is actually better right here, because that's right there. So let me do that one. And then maybe like this right here on the front of this rock. Or yeah, maybe we can do that little dot right there. Change this to white. Okay, so that's 4. And then we got one up here. Maybe that's a good one. Like that. Change that to black. Okay, so that's like 5. Let's just track those through and see if they work. I'm just quickly looking at the bar here and seeing if there's any marks. So right now it's a solid blue, so that looks pretty good. So let's lock that up. And then using the down arrow, we can go through each one of them. And I'm looking for any light blue spots. Let's see. Lock that one up, go down. That one looks pretty good. It got cut off at the end, but that's okay. Down again, that looks good. Down again. And all I'm doing here is if it was a bad tracker, you'd see light blue spots, like right here, actually. So let's take a look at this tracker. On this frame, I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger and reposition it, and then I'm going to retrack it. What's going to happen is that's going to animate over time the scale of this tracker. Right here is going to animate over the shot. So hit play. It's going to slowly get bigger, and there we go. That's a better track. All right, so those look pretty good. Let's add one more, and I want one more maybe right here on this. Now, if we look closely here, let's add a tracker right there. I'm going to actually do this as RGB, and then I'm just going to use some keyframes. So maybe 12. Every 12 frames, it's going to re-keyframe the shape. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so we have 6 trackers in different locations, and the way this works is we're just going to take our 2D tracking points and we're going to place the location on our 3D mesh. And once we do that, it's going to lock the point to that 3D location and seed it. And once we have 6 seed points, we're going to be able to use that as a basic solve. So the way to do that is pretty easy. Go over here, hit place. What that's going to do, it's going to place, you can see if I click in here, and you can see I get this little point, and it's going to say that this 2D point is going to be on this 3D mesh at this point. And if we orbit around, that, you can see that it's on the log right where it's supposed to be. Okay. And if we come over to the coordinates, you can see that now it's set to a seed point, it's locked the point, and it already has the 3D location. So it's going to use that information to help with the solve. So let's just do that with each one of these other ones. So we have this one right here, which is, we go back over to the tracker, and I'm just going to look at so this is kind of the center of that dark area. So something like that. And then we got one right here, which is this point. And then we got this one right here, which is that kind of in the center there. And then we got a couple down this end. So we got this one, which is right there. And we just want this to be pretty close. And then this one is that one, okay? Now, of course, this is going to be kind of an estimate as to where this is. So we're going to be careful with constraining it, but let's see what this does. So at this point, we could solve it and see where we are. So why don't we do that? I'm going to go over to the solver, and instead of automatic, what we want to use is from seed points. And what that's going to do is going to use these 6 points to help try to get an initial solve. And then we can add some automatic trackers just to help smooth out our solve. So let's do that. Actually, you could probably do that ahead of time before you even do this, but let's just do it this way. So I'm going to turn on calculate distortion because there is some lens distortion. Let's hit go. Press OK. And if we lock the screen over here on the perspective view, you can see we already got a pretty decent, this is a pretty decent little solve already. And it looks like it's lining up. It might be easier to see this as the, let's bring the camera view, turn on the mesh. Okay, and so you can kind of see what we already have. Okay, and that's actually pretty accurate already. It's a little jumpy there. And that's where the extra trackers will come in. So why don't we do that? So let's go over to features and blip all frames. And this is going to find all the auto trackers within the shot. Once that's done, just hit peel all, and then we can come back over to the solver. So that just added a whole bunch of points. Now we can just hit go again, press OK. So we have a higher error, but it's definitely helping smooth this out. So why don't we just do a quick cleanup trackers, bad frames, and then under high error trackers, let's bring this down to 10 because we don't really need too many. Hit fix, that'll get rid of that. And then at this point, let's go over to refine because our results are pretty close, and then hit go. So now we're at 0.7 and you can see that kind of smushed everything in. And that's looking pretty good. Right there. That looks like it's locked on pretty nicely with our mesh. I mean, you can really see it right here. Right there with the mesh. Okay, so this is where the accuracy might be an issue, and you can play with this. Now, one thing that you could do is turn on constrain, and that is really going to push each one of these seed points to those locations, which is really going to push everything around. That may or may not cause problems. That's where the accuracy of the mesh can be an issue. But let's try turning on constrain and see if that screws up our solve or not. Let's hit go. You can see how that pushed everything around, and that's going to lock. I mean, it doesn't give it any room for the seed points. It's really going to push them right to those points. And let's see what we got. Okay, that looks really, really good. You need to be really careful with that because you really have to be precise. When we were back in the camera perspective, you need to make sure that you're very precise where you place these, or at least as close as possible. You know, you need to make sure that they're right where you want them to be. So take the time to place them nicely. So that looks pretty good. So let's take a look at this again. I just want to double check it. Yeah, I mean, if we zoom in here, you can see like on this rock here, that looks like it's locked in really nicely. That looks really good. It's locked in nicely to the mesh. And now we can just export it out. Okay, so we use the lens workflow. So let's turn that on. We want to redistort, press OK. Okay, great. So we've removed the lens distortion. And then now we can just go File, Fusion Composition, Save, leave everything the same, and copy to clipboard is what we're going to use because we're going to use Fusion inside of Resolve for this instead of the standalone. If you're using standalone, it doesn't really matter. Press OK, and that's going to kick out the camera and the object and everything that we need for Fusion. So let's head over into Fusion. Okay, so here we are in Fusion. I already have a composition set up with the same footage I use for tracking. And since we copied it to the clipboard, we should be able to just Command V to paste. If you get this error message, this is because of the object path, and you can just disregard that. So let's take a look at this. The only thing we need to change in here is this footage that comes in. Delete that. Just grab your media and drop it into the camera undistorted, and then take our redistorted and drop it in here. You can see we're getting this error. That's the mesh. We just need to locate it. So just browse. Now this is the mesh that was exported out from Syntheyes because it re-exported out the mesh, but we're going to use our original mesh because that's really what you want to be able to do. So I'm going to open that up, and everything should line up. And now you can see, let's just make this a single view. You can see we have our 3D mesh right in front. And if we step through, you can see that's lining up pretty nice. That looks pretty good. So let's do a quick test. Let's take a look at the 3D scene. If we take a look at that, let's go to perspective. If I zoom out, you can see we got our 3D scene. We got our 3D camera and everything lined up, so we can start adding objects in. So for this test, I just want to add in some 3D objects and a light and put some shadows on the wall just for us to test out, make sure everything's working out. So we don't need the texture. So I'm going to undo the texture and make this all white. And then I have a couple shapes just so you don't have to watch me line this up. So we got a spotlight, we got a shape, and another shape. Let's split the view. I'm going to put the media out over here, and then we'll put the 3D scene over here. And what we want to do is our mesh itself, we want go under lighting, turn on affected by lights, and we want shadow receiver, not shadow caster. We also want to go over to the material and we want to turn off lighting, but then turn on shadows. Okay, and so now we're getting some shadows from our objects laying on our 3D mesh. We're just going to do the composite right inside the 3D scene. And to do that, in the camera renderer, just to point out, we're using a software renderer for this so that we have nice shadows. So back in our mesh, our 3D mesh, all we need to do is go under blend mode, software, change this to multiply, and there we go. And now it's going to kind of composite this into the scene. So now we have these objects, and if I were to grab, say, I'll grab the sphere and I move it around, you can see that it's going to form nicely to the shape of our 3D mesh. So this should look pretty good. One in the material. Let's bring that intensity down. Maybe change the color here so it's not as intense. But you can see where I placed these in 3D space, and let's just do a quick render to see if everything lines up well. Okay, and our render's done, so let's just hit the loop and press play and see what we got. Okay, that's looking really nice. And those objects feel like they fit right into the scene. So it looks pretty good. I think if we were to do something like particles, maybe I'll test that later on, had something like snow coming down to land on this, I would be curious to see if the accuracy is that good. But honestly, for a lot of different effects, this is actually pretty good. So anyway, I think that'll do it for this week. If you have any questions or issues, let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.